What's up guys, today we're going to try benchmarking Windows 10 edition, but we're going to emulate lower end hardware. The way I'm going to do that is going to be disabling CPU cores from the program. As you can see, it says I have 11 CPUs, or 12. Well, I actually have 12 threads, not CPU cores. I have only 6 cores, 12 threads. Most of you probably have only 2 cores and 0 threads. I mean, two cores, 2 threads. I'm an idiot. Okay, so because you have 2 cores, I'm going to disable. So I have only 2 cores, okay? But you have only 2 threads, so I'm going to disable 2 threads. So now it's only 2 cores without hyperthreading. Now, the problem is that you probably have Windows running in the background. So I need to take 1 CPU core, assuming that that's how much Windows is going to take. But now I have only 1 CPU core, whereas your CPU will be utilized so the game throws tasks to both of your cores at the same time. Whereas now I have only 1 CPU that can accept any task from the game. So I'm going to enable hyperthreading for this 1 CPU core, so it can take 2 tasks at the same time. That's not exactly how hyperthreading works, but stick with me, okay? That's close enough, okay? It's close enough explanation. Now let's hide the task manager and create a brand new, beautiful, creative world. This might take a while, because we're running only 1 CPU core. It's already... That was faster than I expected. So here we are. It's a brand new world. Beautiful brand new world. It actually renders pretty well. So we're running 16 render distance with 1 CPU core. You'd be running with 2 CPU cores, so my 1 CPU core is basically your 2. Equivalent of your 2 CPU cores, and the game runs pretty well. Pretty much 200 FPS. That is, if you don't have a crappy GPU with your computer, whereas I have very high-end GPU, so it can draw a lot of images per second, as long as the CPU is able to tell it to draw them. And that's kind of the whole idea of this benchmarking, is to see how the CPU scales with performance in Windows 10 edition. So clearly 16 render distance is not enough to stress the 1 CPU enough. Like if we fly, we're going to experience this terrible stuttering. But technically it's fine. If you're in creative and flying, you probably won't even notice it. And if you're on a server, you won't even be running 60 render distance. So this is only in survival. So probably the only way you can get yourself to stutter is using Elytra. And when you're using Elytra, you kinda don't have any dangers around you. So it doesn't matter if it stutters a little. So this is working fine. Let's up the render distance. Put it to 32. Now this should drop the frame rate a little bit. And introduce a lot more stuttering. So you probably should not use 32 render distance when you are running only 2 CPU cores. Unless you have something like the newer Pentiums or i3 CPUs. So you have 2 CPU cores and 4 threads. Because then you can run the game a lot better. Compared to only 2 CPU cores without hyperthreading. Like I'm right now emulating having without hyperthreading. So the game is still running above 60. But you will get a lot more stuttering with your gameplay. Like you can see it constantly is freezing as it's trying to load up the chunks. it is generating brand new chunks and loading them up, and it's very stressful for only one CPU core to do. But, you know, it works fine. This is not what you're gonna run on the phone. Even I've watched new phones and they have like 8 CPU cores, so they're gonna run just fine. The only bottleneck they have is the GPU, but we're testing CPU bottlenecking. And 32 render distance and 2 cores, that's bottlenecking very badly. So, how about if you have 2 CPU cores and 4 threads? Now, I don't know how much that would be in performance, but I think if we just try 2 cores, that would kind of be cheating, because it doesn't have the Windows performance taken out of it. So we could try to just run 2 cores without hyperthreading. Maybe that would be a way. Let's see if it's any different. Do we still have stuttering? Or do we have higher frame rates or something? There's 2 CPU cores running the game now. Assuming that the hyperthreading is used for Windows applications. This is very bad type of experiment. I don't know. I should just jump to the higher amount of cores, because those are gonna be sort of easier to test. So yeah, it doesn't really change much to have hyperthreading. At least I cannot test it much. Let's give it hyperthreading. It's unrealistic that it would run this well. It has 2 cores and hyperthreading without Windows taking any of the performance in the background. This should now run a lot better than it run the last 2 tries. And it kind of does. The world is actually keeping up with my movement. And even though it is having small stutters, they are smaller stutters than before. So that's fine. Now let's give it a 3rd core, assuming you have 4 CPU cores, okay? Without hyperthreading. Okay, you have 4 cores, no hyperthreading. So we're going to give 3 cores from my computer to try to see how your computer would running. Actually, let's give 1 core hyperthreading, just because that's gonna be the missing core performing its calculations. So 1 core has to run 2 cores tasks, and the 2 other cores are free to do what they want. So this should be semi-realistic how a 4 CPU core would run the game. If it's running 3 GHz, that is, and you probably are running like 2. You're probably running 2 GHz with 4 cores, because usually people playing Minecraft have very low-end computers. So we're still running 90 FPS, but I'm not sure, is it just me or is the chunks loading further away? It might be just placebo effect. So there's no effect on running it any better. I don't know. This is the worst test ever. I think it's just glitching right now. It's not even loading those chunks. There we go. Huh. I think it's having a trouble because I've mixed up hyperthreading and normal cores. The game doesn't know what to do right now. If we just give it 3 CPU cores, maybe that works better. Okay. I disabled the hyperthreading. So 3 CPU cores and 32 render distance, and we're getting stutters. And yeah, I'm not sure if I should like reload the world every time I change the settings. I mean the amount of cores the game has. I don't think I need to do that. The game kinda seems to run better. I'm not looking at the FPS counter, but I'm looking at the rendering speed it's doing. So there is a slight bump in performance. Now let's assume you have 6 CPU cores, okay? So we're gonna give it 5 cores to work with. Is that 5? Yes. That is 5. Okay. And we assume that the last 6th core is for Windows. This is not accurate testing, but it's accurate enough. So with 6 cores, if you have an AMD FX blah 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 CPU, you might have 6 CPU cores in it. And it would work perfectly fine with 32 render distance. It would have nothing. It would not have any problems. You should be running perfectly fine FPS and everything. It renders the world like it's supposed to. Your FPS is above 60. Everything is perfect. Now then, how about if you have hyperthreading in your computer? How would that affect it? Now, how would we test this thing? We give hyperthreading to 3 CPU cores. And there's 1, there's 2, there's 3. And then the 4th one would be Windows once again. This is extremely accurate testing, trust me. How long have we been recording? 13 minutes? That's actually not bad. I thought we were at 20. So now with only 3 CPU cores, actually I forgot to... There we go. Now it's only 3 CPU cores and 6 threads. So it would be like having an i7 something something CPU. Or I think the newer i5s have hyperthreading. Maybe. I might be mistaken. But you might have a very old i7 CPU that has 4 CPU cores and 8 threads. So we just take 1 CPU core out of that equation and make it 3 cores and 6 threads for Minecraft. Because that 1 core is gonna do Windows stuff. And it kinda works similarly to the 6 cores. Maybe it has lower frame rate. It seems to be going as low as 60 right now. But it's not bad if it goes down to 60 because it's not like any of you have above 60 Hz monitors, so that should not be a problem. Four cores, 8 threads, works flawlessly. What else can we test? And now, let's see. I guess I'll just enable them all. That's the last thing I can think of. Give it all the cores from my computer. So 32 render distance, all the cores from my computer. Let's try to reload the world. .32 render distance and 6 cores, 6 thread, and 12 threads, and it works flawlessly. Because my computer is flawless. Trust me, I'm an engineer. I guess that's about it then. Guess I can show what 64 render distance runs on my computer on this current version. 1.6.1. Here we start to run into a GPU bottleneck. My GPU cannot handle the render distance. There's too much stuff to draw. So the FPS drops significantly. But I can run 64 render distance with 30 FPS. Or 40. Or 50. It almost goes to 60. And it runs a little bit better when I'm not recording, but not much. There we go. How about 40? 40 render distance runs above 60. There we go. Oh no, it dropped below 60. How can this happen to me? So I guess that's it for testing. We have done it all the frame rates. We have observed a lot of stuttering. We have observed different render distances. Or not much different render distances, but you know, few render distances. And how they perform with lower end systems. Or emulated lower end systems. I could have done this better by disabling CPU cores and restarting and shutting down the computer over and over again. But that's way too much work for no gain. It's not like this video will get more than a few hundred views. Or maybe it will get a lot of views like the previous video got. I don't know. I don't actually know why people were watching the other one. I was only showing how the game was working on my computer. But now I'm kind of showing how it would work on other people's computers, so it might have more usable information for you who's watching. So yeah, that's about it. Thanks for watching.